Hello and welcome to this special edition of Gravitas. My name is Mohammed Saleh and let's get the show rolling. Now, in the cover story tonight on Gravitas, we'll be taking you to the battlefields of Bakhmut. We'll also try and unearth the story behind this mindless bloodletting that we are witnessing in Ukraine. Great leaders, they say, can lead their nations to glory, but then sometimes there are leaders with the pretensions of greatness who fail to read the logic of real politics and then get sucked up in a war that really does not belong to their people. Now, as we've asked this question before, whose war is it anyway in Ukraine? Is it Putin's war because he invaded? Is it Biden's or is it Volodymyr Zelensky? It's not an easy question to answer. But what is very important at this point of time that each one of us must in fact ponder upon is why is it that none of these three leaders are willing to sit down and talk and negotiate for peace? And also on the show tonight, we'll be talking about how Ukraine's wartime president Volodymyr Zelensky, who some have hailed as the Ukrainian version of Winston Churchill, might well be presiding over the destruction of the Ukrainian nation as we know it. And apart from this, we'll also take you to the United States, where after the turmoil of the Silicon Valley Bank, state regulators have now shut down the New York-based Signature Bank in what has been dubbed as the third largest failure in the US banking history. Is this the beginning of a domino effect of yet another global financial crisis? And we'll also be going to Britain, where we'll be taking a look at the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who appears to have landed himself in more than just some hot water, as his plans for a private heated swimming pool has sparked a furor in a nation that at this moment is battling double-digit inflation. And some news from the Oscars, where S.S. Rajamouli's blockbuster RRR has created history, as the hit song Natu Natu has been awarded as the best original song at the 95th Academy Awards in Los Angeles. Alright, so this of course is the cover story tonight, and this is something that each one of you who's been watching the war unfold in Ukraine have been talking about. The Ukraine war, make no mistake, is redefining the world order. But what does it mean for the people of Ukraine? This is a question that has not been often asked. It may look obvious at first, but very few have said it in clear and unequivocal terms. What is unfolding in Ukraine is effectively the destruction of the Ukrainian nation as we know it. Headlines around the world have in fact focused on the meat grinder of a battle in Bakhmut. As things stand, the battle for Bakhmut could well be the defining moment in this war. And we'll of course talk about it in the next few minutes. But tonight on Gravitas, we want to look at Ukraine beyond this war. Remember, every war will end. But the question of course is, when will Ukraine's misery end and on what terms will the war end in Ukraine? At this very moment, China's President Xi Jinping has in fact put in play a pretty audacious diplomatic initiative which will create perhaps the first possible bridge between Moscow and Kiev, between Putin and Zelensky since the war began. We say possible since who can be certain in such uncertain times? We will see as to what happens, although the very fact that both Putin and Zelensky will of course be talking to Xi Jinping on the war raises some ray of optimism. But whatever happens, the question of course is this: what of Ukraine's future? Because remember, when we talk of war, we often forget that we are talking about people. Now, do you see green fields in Ukraine, or do you see a picture of devastation? Do you see prosperity, or do you see abject poverty? Do you see flourishing towns, or do you see towns that have been reduced to rubble, crippled adults and scarred children? These are two contrasting scenarios, and which one is likely to play out not just today, not just in 6 months from now, but for many years to come in Ukraine? Because no matter who wins the battle for Bakhmut or who wins the Ukraine war, the fact remains that the havoc that's been inflicted on Ukraine is not going to heal anytime quickly. And mark my words when I say this, this is an intergenerational conflict. This is not a conflict that will die down in this generation in Ukraine. This war will continue to haunt Ukraine for generations to come. And the question that must be asked is, who is responsible for this? The general answer is likely to be President Putin of Russia, because he launched the invasion. But is that the complete truth? Moscow believes that the war did not begin in 2022. It began when NATO, spurred by America, began expanding its borders to the boundaries of Russia and turned Ukraine into a cat's paw. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky must take a large share of the blame as well. It is in fact under his watch that Ukraine became a victim of what is essentially America's proxy war with its Cold War enemy. The Bakhmut, remember, is just one of the many tragedies that we've witnessed, where the situation is simply becoming bloodier and bloodier by the day. The Wagner Group mercenaries captured this video of what they claim is Bakhmut. You know, this used to be an industrial town with a population of 72,000 people. There were salt refineries. There used to be wineries in this town. But all that's left of Bakhmut now are essentially just ruined homes, wrecked cars, and dead bodies scattered all over this ghost town.
Здесь у них в ангарах находились люди.
Thousands of people once lived in this town. Most of them have fled, and they've taken with them the future of Ukraine. Remember those words. The people who have fled from Ukraine are essentially the future of this nation. At least 8 million people have left Ukraine since the beginning of the war. And a majority of those who have in fact fled from Ukraine are young women and children. 8 million. Think about it. This is still a conservative number. Now, out of a population of 41 million, what remains of a country when almost about a quarter of its population is in fact gone? Now, what happens to those people who've stayed back? And what happens to their children? Now, Russia is bombing schools. It's bombing play schools, children's hospitals. And just last week, remember, Russia dropped a 1,500 kilogram bomb in the city of Chernihiv in Ukraine. What is happening at this moment is that Moscow is increasingly normalizing the use of next-generation weapons in Ukraine. Now, last week we told you about the barrage of hypersonic missiles, such as the Kinzhal missile, that in fact was struck across cities in Ukraine. About 9 people died. But what's the guarantee that the next round of missiles won't claim more lives? Which brings me back to this question. What happens to the future of Ukraine and the Ukrainians who've now stayed back? So let's go back to Bakhmut. Ukraine has admitted the loss of at least about 200 Ukrainian soldiers who've died in Bakhmut in just the last couple of days. Now, this too would be an underestimate. Ukraine claims that the Russian casualty is much higher. At this moment, Ukraine says that for every Ukrainian soldier who's falling in Bakhmut, it is able to kill 7 Russian soldiers. But there's absolutely no way that anyone can confirm these numbers.
In less than a week, starting from 6th March, we managed to kill more than 1,100 enemy soldiers in the Bakhmut sector alone, which is Russia's irreversible loss. The loss right there, near Bakhmut. Furthermore, at least 1,500 more enemy sanitary losses, those whose wounds are incompatible with continuing the fight. Plus dozens of units of enemy equipment were destroyed. Plus, more than 10 Russian ammunition depots were burned down.
You know, this war is not a question of who's killed how many. The fact of the matter is people are dying and the war is destroying Ukraine. Russia claims to have captured the eastern part of Bakhmut and also the outskirts in the north and the south. The Bakhmut will open the Donbas industrial region for Russia. The war is bleeding Ukraine's economy. In 2022 alone, the cost of war for Ukraine was almost about a third of its GDP. And today, a common Ukrainian is struggling to get even a simple hot meal, hot water, mobile network, internet. What Europe takes for granted has become an absolute luxury. And normalcy is just a long-lost dream for people in Ukraine. So the question, of course, is what's left? The people of Ukraine, a majority of the young crowd, has fled. The economy has been shattered. People are dying. And the question is, why is Ukraine paying this high a price, and for whom? Is it for America's proxy war? Now remember, this is not the first time that the United States of America has fought a proxy war or has tried to topple a government. It did not want Zelensky, and Zelensky, of course, should have known better because America has got a track record of sorts to speak of. Iraq and Afghanistan are just 21st century examples. Did Zelensky play into Western hands? And now comes the real big question. Has Zelensky, who's made the West pay for the war with some brilliant PR, begun to realize that he must actually find a way out of the trap? Think about it. Is that why he's now responded to the Chinese initiative? If China succeeds in bringing the war to a halt, it will, of course, upturn all the strategic calculations that have been made in Washington and London and Brussels. Now, what happens next week when President Xi Jinping visits Moscow and then talks to Zelensky will, of course, tell us if the future will be different from the current scenario. Let's now shift our attention to another very big story, and this, of course, is something that a lot of people are going to be talking about for many years to come. Let me begin by a few questions. What are the conditions of becoming a Catholic priest? Now, the answer is simple. You must be a man, you must have been baptized, and you must take up celibacy. The Catholic Church teaches that a priest should dedicate himself entirely to his vocation, and that he should essentially take the church as his spouse. Now, it's been like this for 1,000 years, but the tradition is now being challenged, and it is being challenged by no less an individual than the Pope himself. Pope Francis has said that celibacy should in fact be reviewed. He's called it temporary. Now, the question, of course, is, can the reformist Pope do away with this age-old tradition which binds a priest of the Catholic Church to celibacy? Now, listen in to what he had to say.
So there is no contradiction for a priest to be able to marry. Celibacy in the Western Church is a temporal prescription. I don't know if it is resolved one way or the other, but it is temporary in this sense. It is not eternal, like priestly ordination, which is forever, whether you like it or not. Whether you leave or not is another matter, but it is forever. Celibacy, on the other hand, is a discipline.
Now remember, this is not the first time that celibacy has in fact come under question. The tradition is old. But it wasn't always like this. It's hard to believe, but it wasn't always like this, even in the Catholic Church. Saint Peter, the first pope, was in fact married. Celibacy officially became a requirement for priesthood only in the 11th century, when Pope Gregory VII had issued a decree. And under that, all priests were required to remain celibate. A priest also was expected not to, in fact, ever get married in his life, and it was expected that the bishops would, of course, enforce this vow of celibacy for all the priests. So what made Pope Gregory to decide this? Now, it wasn't just devotion towards the church, it was also about money. Now, clergy without children were more likely to leave their wealth to the church. The decree stuck. Celibacy has been the norm ever since. But there have been exceptions. Now, take the Eastern Rite, for example. It takes celibacy as a discipline, not as a doctrine. Now, there is a room for a certain level of diversity. The priests, of course, get a choice. Pope Francis has also pointed out that there is a possibility that this tradition, which it's hard to believe, could potentially change within the Catholic Church.
No creo.
There are married priests in the Catholic Church, and the whole Eastern Rite is married, all the Eastern Rite. Here in the Curia, we have one married priest. I saw him today, and he has his wife and son. He comes and goes.
Now, the issue is not new. Pope Francis, of course, has hinted of some changes back in 2020. He said that he was open to the possibility of ordaining married men. Why? Because concerns were mounting. There was a shortage of priests in the Amazon region, and church celibacy was being blamed for this. The Latin American bishops have recommended that married men should be allowed to become priests in the Catholic Church. This would, of course, be a revolutionary change, but despite showing openness, Pope Francis had rejected the landmark proposal. He's proceeded with a lot of caution because it is not easy to overturn a tradition that has been in exercise for 1,000 years. Polarization is also an issue that has deepened within the church. Traditionalists have opposed his papacy, and then there was Pope Benedict XVI's indirect intervention. The old Pope had pledged to remain hidden from the world, and yet he remained a quiet critic of Pope Francis. He broke his silence and reaffirmed the value of priestly celibacy. So how did he do that? By co-authoring a bombshell of a book. It was called From the Depths of Our Hearts, Priesthood, Celibacy, and the Crisis of the Catholic Church. Its excerpts were released at an interesting time. It was when Pope Francis was mulling on exceptions to celibacy. Was it Benedict's public attempt to sway Francis's decision? Even if it wasn't, it seems to have worked. Pope Benedict is no more, but several other challenges still remain. While Pope Francis has been celebrated by the liberals, he has faced widespread criticism from the conservatives. Now, many see Francis's ideologies as a grave threat to orthodoxy and tradition. The debate over celibacy, of course, continues, and it's not an easy debate within Catholic circles. Let's put it that way. Progressives have said that it is high time that the Church recognizes the demands of the devoted. The conservatives have called the idea as a threat, nothing less than a threat to priesthood. Now, Pope Francis's recent statements have rekindled this question. Could the Roman Catholic Church lift this vow of celibacy that is an absolute requirement for a person to become a priest? Will the reformist Pope bring about this landmark change? But most important of all, will Catholics be willing to accept a priest within them who is in fact a married man? This is not an easy debate. The Catholic Church has been debating it, and will of course hear more on this issue in the days to come. Let's now shift our attention to what is unfolding in the United States of America. When New York, which happens to be the financial capital of the world, sneezes, the rest of the world catches a serious cold. So the question is this: is the United States bracing itself for a domino effect of bank failures? So why do I say a domino effect? Because on the 10th of March, the Silicon Valley Bank shut down. This, remember, was the second biggest banking failure in American history, just behind the Washington Mutual, which had collapsed during the 2008 financial crisis. The financial regulators in the United States told everyone to not panic. But you know what they say when state regulators begin giving you advice in a public statement that people should not panic? It means that the rot runs deep. Just 2 days after the collapse of the Silicon Valley Bank, another American banking giant, the New York-based Signature Bank, sank. The Signature Bank had assets to the tune of about $110 billion. It had deposits, just deposits, to the tune of nearly about $88.59 billion. The U.S. State Treasury Department has been at pains to try and reassure the public that no losses will be borne by the taxpayer. Pay attention to the word. It says no losses will be borne by the taxpayer. It does not talk of the people who have deposited their money in these banks. Now, what happens to those who have deposited their money in the bank? Because according to the December 2022 regulatory filings at this moment, and we're talking of the United States, 85% of all deposits in American banks are uninsured. And here's the interesting bit. According to the regulators, depositors of the Silicon Valley Bank and the Signature Bank, whose holdings exceed about $250,000, will be able to access their money from Monday. But remember this: businesses function on the free flow of cash. And if you can't access funds to pay for your orders and to pay for salaries, This will, of course, will have a serious impact on how companies can function. The crisis in the American banking system at this time is so acute that even President Biden has been forced to make a public statement. His administration has now promised to do whatever it takes to stop a domino effect, to reassure investors about the health of banks around the world. Listen in to the American president.
I want to briefly speak about what's happening in Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank. Today, thanks to the quick action of my administration over the past few days, Americans can have confidence that the banking system is safe. Your deposits will be there when you need them. Small businesses across the country, the deposit accounts at these banks can breathe easier knowing they'll be able to pay their workers and pay their bills. And their hardworking employees can breathe easier as well. Last week, when we learned of the problems of the banks and the impact they could have on jobs of small businesses and banking system overall, I instructed my team to act quickly to protect these interests. They've done that.
Now remember, this is no ordinary crisis which has struck the American banking system. The high interest rates mean that operational costs and loan servicing costs have gone up tremendously. And this has squeezed profit margins and in many cases has also prevented businesses that have taken loans from breaking even. When the Silicon Valley Bank headquartered in California collapsed, it wiped off a $100 billion in terms of market valuation of US banks. The crisis began with, of course, losses by businesses who were struggling to make profits due to the high interest rates. When the depositors got wind of this problem, they triggered a bank run. But guess who the real villains of the Silicon Valley Bank collapse actually are? Believe it or not, Silicon Valley actually dealt in giving out loans to a lot of startups. And the people who decided to short the Silicon Valley Bank when its shares started to collapse were venture capitalists who decided to make money by shorting the Silicon Valley stocks. The Silicon Valley Bank focused its businesses on lending to startups. Venture capitalists often relied on the Silicon Valley Bank to invest in startups to make their profits. But when the Silicon Valley Bank was down, they are said to be one of the first to have shorted it. Nothing, as they say, should come in between making a good profit. The New York headquartered Signature Bank had private clients in places such as Connecticut, California, Nevada, and North Carolina. It had exposure in sectors such as commercial real estate and also digital asset banking. But most important for all, and especially this is relevant if you have any exposure in the cryptocurrency market, the fact is almost a quarter of the deposits in the Signature Bank were from the cryptocurrency sector. So how will this banking crisis shape the global economy in the next few weeks is something that all financial pundits will be watching with butterflies in their stomachs. Let's now shift our focus to the Oscars. It's what everyone has been talking about at the moment. Several stories have emerged from India and it's been an exceptional year for India. Especially the hit Telugu song Natu Natu from the film RRR, which has created not just a buzz, but has now created history. It's in fact become the first Indian film song to win an Oscar. But it's not even a surprise now from its lyrical composition to high energy renditions and also the easy to learn hook steps. The song had everyone going gaga, but that's not the only winner. Now, India's The Elephant Whisperers has also bagged the Best Documentary Short Award. It was another first for the country, directed by Kartiki Gonsalves and produced by Guneet Monga. The heartwarming film captured a deep bond between elephants and humans. Now, as India shines bright at the Oscars, do you see a link between the award-winning masterpieces? So let's actually try and get deeper into this. When we talk of Indian blockbusters, we rarely look beyond Bollywood. We care about the Khans and the Kapoors and also talk about sizzling item numbers whose lyrics don't make sense half the time. Now, I've got nothing against Bollywood, but the industry does get a lot of hype to the point that several other creations simply go unnoticed and underappreciated. But this time round, it is non-Bollywood productions that have finally received their deserved spotlight. And it has served as a reminder to Indians, in fact everyone, to look at the nooks and crannies and to pay attention to the regional films and to diversify their sources of entertainment. While India was bagging Oscars, there was a particular production house that was making the most of it. I'm talking about Netflix, and it is betting big on India as an entertainment hub for the world, especially seeing China's love-hate relationship with the Western streaming platforms. Now, Netflix is heavily marketing Indian productions, and it seems to be working out both for Netflix and also for the Indian productions. Now, RRR drew over 73 million hours of viewing on Netflix in the first month of its release. The Elephant Whisperers was also released on Netflix, and now that it has won an Oscar, its views are bound to skyrocket. And who do you think is going to be reaping the benefit? Now, no prizes for guessing here. Netflix is going to be the obvious winner. Now, as we celebrate India's maiden win, there's actually more to look at it. It seems as if it was a year of firsts at the Oscars. For the first time since 1961, the Oscars' iconic red carpet was replaced with a champagne one. And Michelle Yeoh also became the first Asian actress ever to win the Best Actress award. And interestingly, Malala Yousafzai also decided to make a debut at the event, and she walked down the champagne carpet in a custom silver sequined Ralph Lauren dress. Her gown also had what was described as a quasi-hijab attached to it, while her looks attracted a lot of appreciation on social media. My question is this: how much did the designer actually pay Malala to don the gown? The headscarf barely covered her head. The Nobel laureate has mentioned it before. She wears a headscarf more as a cultural symbol and less because of her faith. So what was the designer's actual motive? Was the dress an overplayed symbol of inclusivity? A paid one at that. And designers, of course, bend to public demands. It doesn't take much to anticipate as to what can attract eyeballs on the internet, especially when issues of faith are involved. But irrespective of what it may, the fact remains that Malala Yousafzai did turn a lot of heads, and her presence on the champagne carpet this time round is something that is going to be talked about for a long time to come. So whatever Ralph Lauren's tactic has been, it has clearly worked. Netizens are simply in awe of Malala Yousafzai at the Oscars in a Ralph Lauren dress. Now, this is a difficult question which countries around the world are trying to contend with. What many aren't in awe of, though, is what's in fact happened in India's top court. The Supreme Court of India was hearing the arguments in a plea seeking legal validation of same-sex marriages in India. And that is when, interestingly, the Indian government decided to come out in opposition of the idea of giving legal validation to gay marriages. The question is why? Now, the government says that heterosexual marriages, or a marriage between a man and a woman, have been the norm throughout history. And any divergence from it may in fact hurt the sentiments of the society and also the values of the country. The government has also said that while homosexuality has been decriminalized in India, it by no means has been legitimized. This is what the government contends, and our next report gets you more details.
It is one of those things you don't talk about openly in India, at least not in most cases. So it was branded almost revolutionary when India's top court decriminalized homosexuality in India. In 2018, the Supreme Court of India revoked Article 377. It's been 5 years since. And in these years, the focus shifted to the path ahead, to the question of what's next. Now that homosexuality is decriminalized, is marriage the next and obvious stepping stone? Will gay couples finally have the state's blessing in marriage? All hopes were once again pinned on the top court. The Supreme Court of India was hearing the arguments on a plea seeking legal validation of same-sex marriages in India. To some people's surprise, the government of India said gay marriage cannot be legalized in India. Why? The government has its explanation. It said, and I quote, The parliament has designed and framed the marriage laws in the country, which are governed by the person laws, codified laws relatable to customs of various religious communities, to recognize only the union of a man and a woman to be capable of legal sanction, and thereby claim legal and statutory rights and consequences. Basically, what the government is saying is that the top court should not give a legal stamp to gay marriages. 1. It will be against the law framed by the parliament. And 2. It will be against the religious ethos of the country. Now, we are not getting into the right and wrong here, just stating what transpired in the court this morning. There's no doubt that religion is a powerful element of social consciousness in India. There's also no doubt that there is no scope for homosexual unions in any religion. Which explains why the government of India told the top court that in India, laws concerning adoption, rape, dowry prohibition, maintenance also have no provision for homosexual marriages. Because these laws clearly use the terms husband and wife. But here's a question: can't laws be changed? After all, religious texts were written centuries ago. Some laws, too, are decades old, if not more. The society then and now look very different. So, shouldn't laws change to remain relevant? In an ideal world, yes, but implementing the ideal becomes impossible in most countries and societies, whose foundations have been built on marriage, and where religion remains a powerful social instrument. Sure, some countries have been able to legalize marriage, the United States and the United Kingdoms of this world, but these also happen to be the countries that are moving away from the church with every passing day. India is very different. It is unlike the West, unlike Canada or China, where if Xi Jinping had his way, the country would be officially atheist, with no identity but Chinese. And yet China opposes homosexual marriages. Most countries do. Only 32 allow homosexual marriages. The government of India does not want India to be one of them. In its submission before the court, the government, time and again, refers to the societal ethos, the values of the country, even public acceptance. Whether it is right or wrong is a story for another day.
As the shortcomings of the British government continue to rise, with millions of British people facing some very high energy bills, and citizens also helplessly cutting their energy use, believe it or not, the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has decided to build for himself a private swimming pool. And it is no ordinary private pool. This is a private heated swimming pool which has been connected to the local power grid in New Yorkshire. This at a time where the common British people are struggling to even put food on their table. So the private heated swimming pool has literally landed Rishi Sunak in more than a bit of hot water. The private heated swimming pool has been dubbed as a show of utmost elitism and lack of empathy for people of one's own nation. Rishi Sunak's high energy consuming luxury pool has required an upgrade of the local energy grid. While people are turning off the heating in their homes, the Premier is in fact pushing for extra equipment in the national grid so that his new pool is met with its special power demands. The pool is in Rishi Sunak's $1.5 million vacation home will cost the Premier tens of thousands of pounds as he pays for the electricity grid upgrade. No one is questioning about whether he can pay for his private heated swimming pool or not, because he can. He's wealthy. But the question, of course, is this. He's doing this at a time when Britain is going through an acute financial crisis. There are hundreds of local pools which are being forced to cut opening hours owing to the ever-rising energy costs across Britain. The House of Commons has in fact called on the government to offer help to local swimming pools in the forthcoming budget. And this has come after over 350 pools were either closed or were ordered to cut opening hours. On the other hand, the government is now planning to end its energy bill support scheme. And this has put British people in a very tough spot. While Rishi Sunak has been prioritising the heating of his private swimming pool, people in Britain are making difficult choices on what they pay as rent, on what they eat, and how much they're paying for their heating. Now remember, Rishi Sunak is in hot water not just for his private heated swimming pool. He's also taken a bit of an opposing stand in relation to China. The Premier has in fact gone against the views of his own party members and has categorised China as not a threat. Now this is a clear defiance against his senior Tories, including his predecessor Liz Truss, who had pushed for China to be reclassified as nothing less than a threat. But this soft spot for China does not stop here. Now Rishi Sunak in fact backed away from describing China as the biggest long-term threat for Britain during a meeting with the US President and the Australian Prime Minister. In a clear confession to the media, the British Premier has said that it won't be smart to strain relations with China. He's also gone on to drop compliments, saying that after all, China has the second biggest economy and is a member of the United Nations Security Council. In a backlash to Sunak's view of China as a friendly ally, the Tory chair of the Commons Foreign Affairs Committee, Alicia Kearns, has said that China is actually undermining Britain's national security. She's also said that no country can have economic security without national security. And other Tories have also called out Sunak's stance as being soft towards the Chinese and of being fearful rather than be feared. Now, amid Sunak's friendly take towards China and also ignorance to China's threats to the United Kingdom's economy and security, he has now finally broken his silence over the BBC broadcaster's ouster related to the government's controversial refugee crackdown. The British Prime Minister has simply put the BBC on the spot and has told the broadcaster to resolve the Gary Lineker issue according to its terms. Rishi Sunak said that the problem should in fact be resolved in a timely manner after Lineker in fact compared the language used to launch the British migrant policy to the rhetoric of a Nazi-era Germany. This also sparked questions. Can British news anchors actually exercise their freedom of expression? Can they criticise the government's policies? The BBC eventually reinstated Gary Lineker as a broadcaster after Rishi Sunak held the BBC responsible for finding a solution. The Lineker row has of course come into light after Rishi Sunak had proposed the illegal migration bill, which simply detains and also removes people who enter into the country illegally. The bill will also seek to end all illegal entry as a route to seek asylum into the United Kingdom. The British government has said that illegal migrants will either be sent home or they could be sent to another third country such as Rwanda. The bill of course faces a lot of backlash both politically and legally, as the United Kingdom already takes far fewer refugees in comparison with other major European nations. Now, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak might be set to face some heavy criticism for his actions, but the question of course is this: will it stop the British Premier from taking further riskier actions, or will Britain continue to boil in Rishi Sunak's private heated pool? This of course is a question which the British people would want to know an answer for. Now, are you waiting for your year-end salary increment? Will a six-figure salary finally bring joy to you, or do you prioritize mental well-being or a high-paying job? And the question also is, if a job is not well-paying, can you have peace of mind? Now, Indians seem to be creating a bit of a dent on the idea that money brings happiness. In some cases it does and in some it doesn't. Several Indians are in fact, believe it or not, opting for a low-paying job if it means less stress and better mental health. The office is where most adults spend a lot of their time, but what if your workplace results in your demise? This is not a joke. Workplace environments are becoming very distressing for quite a few employees, resulting in people even attempting suicide and at times adding to the death toll. Another devil amidst the accepted Indian work culture are long working hours. This does not only tire out an employee, it also contributes to severe health degradation. Research says that nearly about 33% of Indian employees suffer from acute stress. 33%, that is 1 in 3 people, which in turn affects their work performance, and about 34% experience decreased concentration. And it does not stop here. 31% are simply unable to build healthy relationships with colleagues, and about 26% fall low in terms of their productivity requirements. Now, looking at all the ill effects of a poor work environment, people in fact suggest that an employee should talk to their manager and should seek help. Now, it's harder than it seems, at least for an Indian employee. Several workers are extremely wary of reaching out to their managers, and up to about 49% of the Indian employees say that they simply do not want to express their concerns to their manager, while only about 30% reach out to a superior once in a month to in fact tell their senior that they are being overworked. Putting mental health before money won't only help your brain, but it also will help your relationships as well. Research has proven that 46% of the Indians prioritize their families over work. 26% of the employees put their friends before their occupation, and about 30% keep self-love, such as self-care and exercise, as a top priority. The hustle culture has led people to in fact worship work, and also an increasing number of people have now embraced this. But overworking yourself can also lead to an early age burnout, leading to a deteriorating mental health. And this happens while giant corporations make profits by giving high-paying jobs in exchange for non-profit work hours for employees. Indians are now recognizing the cost of well-paying jobs, and more than 88% of the employees are now willing to quit if it improves their health. Research has now shown that this is a revelation that has been brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic, a time when people could rarely do anything but spend time with themselves and understand as to what brings them real happiness, what brings them real peace of mind. It's not money, it's actually having your things in order. Now, many Indian businessmen in fact say that by putting mental health of workers first, an organization can foster a culture of positivity and engagement. Because at the end of the day, a company's stability and survival depends on its employees. And the only way a business can in fact help its employees is by investing to make for a better work environment. The mental health crisis faced by Indian employees can be fixed by building a positive work environment, first off establishing good communication amongst the employees. A transparent and also an open workplace will encourage employee engagement and will also help workers to come up with innovative ideas. Next is also to offer support and services. A company should provide policies and practices to help employees suffering from stress or any mental illness. Making clear and feasible goals for employees, managers can identify specific goals for their workers, and these goals can in fact include break timings, socialization breaks, and also a specific time for clocking out. And last but not the least, implementing professional and personal boundaries, and there should be a bit of a cutoff between a person's work and his personal life. An employee deserves to spend time with his family and with his friends without worrying about what is going on at work. Now, this wave of new Indian employees are putting their mental health on top, and this could of course encourage companies to finally give leverage to an employee's well-being, because only a healthy brain can keep a business sane. All right, let's also now take a quick look at the global headlines.
6 people are dead and 31 others are missing in a ferry accident in the West African nation of Gabon. 161 passengers were on board the ferry Esther Miracle at the time of the accident. Gabon's Air Force has been conducting search operations to find the missing people, and an investigation is underway to ascertain the cause of the accident. Large-scale strikes blocking fuel deliveries from French refineries continued for the 6th day, after the French Senate voted over the weekend to adopt President Emmanuel Macron's controversial pension reforms. Hundreds of unionists joined a picket line and burned tires and stopped a number of trucks from entering or leaving before the police came and cleared the blockade. Hundreds of desperate Mexican migrants tried to break through the lines of barbed wire, barriers and shields in a bid to make their way through to demand asylum in the United States. Many of the migrants had young children with them and were frustrated with the problems of securing appointments to seek asylum using the new U.S. government app. Thousands of junior doctors in Britain walked out on Monday to protest over wages they claim works out at less per hour than what a barista gets paid.
Rishi Sunak, hear us say, we need you to raise our pay.
The strike by the junior doctors is the latest involving staff at Britain's state-funded National Health Service. Following walkouts by nurses, paramedics and other workers who are demanding a pay rise to match the double-digit inflation. A breach in the Pajaro River levee has resulted in massive flooding in the Pajaro community of California. A 120-foot section of the Pajaro River levee broke in a matter of hours. Floodwaters began to rise. Nearly 2,000 people have been evacuated, with rescue crews still on the lookout for people stranded in their homes in the flooded and now inaccessible neighborhoods. 19 people were killed and a medical facility was burned in a raid on a village in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. The Congolese army has blamed the attack on a Ugandan armed group based in eastern Congo that has pledged allegiance to Islamic State and conducts frequent raids on villages. Artificial intelligence camera systems have now been installed in some restaurants in Japan to catch unhygienic pranks after a video of a man licking a soy sauce bottle went viral online. Once any unusual behavior is caught by the camera, the AI system will send an alert to restaurant staff to remove that tray from the belt. Canada were crowned queens of the beach volleyball court as Estonia took the king of the court title at Miami Beach. Brazil took second place and Czech Republic third. The Canadian team came into the competition with strong credentials, as Humana Paredes is the 2022 and 2018 Commonwealth champion and 2019 world champion, while Wilkerson secured a silver medal in the 2022 World Championships. India have qualified for the World Test Championship final for the second consecutive time. India's place in the title clash was secured after New Zealand beat Sri Lanka in Christchurch. Rohit Sharma's side played out a draw against Australia in the fourth test, winning the series 2-1. Scottie Scheffler has become golf's world number one again after winning the PGA Tour's Players' Championship by 5 strokes. The 26-year-old carded a final round 3 under 69 to become the third player to hold both the Masters and the Players' titles.
Well, that's all the time we have in this edition of Gravitas. We'll leave you with these Gravitas images. Have a good night.